Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Science Fiction Prototyping Podcast. I am Brian David Johnson, the author of the Science Fiction Prototyping column in the IEEE's Computer Magazine. And this month's podcast comes to you from San Francisco and Portland, Oregon. We are in the dog days of summer. It is late August, early September, and everybody's kind of wrapping up their summer. The weather has just been absolutely gorgeous this year. And as a part of the work that we've been doing with science fiction prototyping, I was down in San Francisco, and we were having a conference, an Intel Labs conference, where we get together a lot of our researchers and also the people that we partner with outside of the company in military and in government as well as universities. And we were getting together to share information. And at the beginning of this conference, I was sitting in the audience and heard one of my colleagues, Dr. Tony Salvador, give a presentation about some work that he and his colleagues had been doing around data. And as a part of this presentation, to kick it off, he told a story about Copernicus and the massive effect that Copernicus's vision had on the world. And his idea really resonated with me. You know, he showed two pictures of what the world looked like before Copernicus and what the world looked like after Copernicus. And very, very simply, the world before Copernicus's great idea, the solar system and the orbits of the planets were very beautiful. They did these loop-de-loops, and Mars, I think, sort of flipped over on itself several times, but it placed the Earth at the center of the solar system. And so the map of the solar system was this incredibly complex thing, but very beautiful to look at. But when Copernicus had his idea, sort of instantly, everything changed. The map of the solar system came much closer to the map that we know today, with the sun at the center, and suddenly everything made sense. And I was fascinated by this because Tony used it as a way to start talking about things that were changing with data. And for me, I started thinking about what would that Copernican moment be like? Literally, what would it feel like to be Copernicus? To be standing there and have that flash of inspiration and see the map of the solar system suddenly changed and see it all working out quite simply and quite beautifully. And so I was talking with Tony about this, and I thought it would be good to bring him on the podcast to actually talk a little bit more about this idea of the Copernican moment and what was going on with data and what was the work that he was doing. And the September column in the IEEE Computer Magazine for the Science Fiction Prototyping column really kind of gets into that and thinks about the Copernican moment and talks about even my own Copernican moment, and puts a call out to everybody to say, here's some examples of my own personal Copernican moment and other moments that really kind of radically change the world that we live in. But I thought it would be a really good idea to have Tony onto the podcast, have a quick conversation with him about the work that he was doing, get him to elaborate a little bit more, because I really think the work that he and his colleagues are doing is really, really fascinating and worth delving into a little bit more. So I sat down with Tony the next week up in Portland, Oregon, up in where we have Intel Labs, and we dug into it a little bit more. So here's a bit of my conversation with Tony. Dr. Tony Salvador, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me today.
Oh, I'm very happy to be here, Brian.
I'm pleased that I could bring you to the IEEE podcast, because I always tell people I may talk like a social scientist, but I am not a social scientist, but I sit next to one, and you're actually the social scientist I sit next to.
I am. You sit next to me, I sit next to you. It's funny how that works.
So in this month's column in the IEEE, we talk about this Copernican moment, and it really started with a talk that you gave down in San Francisco, where you were talking about the pre-Copernican model of the solar system was beautiful. It had these loop-de-loops, and like Mars did like pirouettes, and like literally if you look up at like the 150 AD model, it looks like a flower. It's gorgeous. Mm-hmm. And then Copernicus with one tiny mind shift, sort of changed everything, and then poof, everything sort of changed. And you were talking about this, that there's actually a Copernican moment going on, literally right now, when it comes to data. So some of the work that you and your team are doing around that shift, and it's a radical shift, it's a flux, as you like to call it, which I love that. What's going on with data? Like, how is it changing?
You know, it's interesting to think about data in terms of a Copernican shift. And largely it's because people don't really think about data at all, right? They really haven't thought about it until very recently with some of the current events that we have going on, in fact. And I think it's not dissimilar to the way people thought about the stars in the heavens in the past. Long time ago, they knew they were there, they knew there were stars, they knew they were up in the heavens, they thought they were pinholes in the night sky, and they could see the light of heaven from the other side. But they didn't think about how it's all organized. They didn't know that. This was the province of the highly educated, the court scientists and the astronomers and the astrologers at the time, you know, crafting the heavens and divining the future and doing all of that. So there were very, very few people that were actually talking about the stars. And up until recently, there's been really very few people talking about data, trying to understand what it is about data that is of interest to us and how we use data. And data was the province of scientists. Data were things people collected when they wanted to know the answer to some natural law. Can we find a Higgs boson particle? We need data to do that. And we talked about those data as being scientific data that we have to find. Right? But then the internet came along. And suddenly, we're generating data in everything we do, though nobody recognized, very few people recognized that we actually generated those data. And then more recently, we've been playing with new devices, with music devices and phone devices and computer devices and all kinds of devices that have digital capabilities and that are creating a stream of data everywhere we go. And we've become more aware of all of these data items. And I think for us, for the work that we do, thinking about data in this Copernican moment, it's thinking about, well, whose data are those? Who do they belong to? Are they mine? I'm creating them, but I'm actually working with other people who make these devices, other companies that actually use the data when I buy a book or something like that. Whose data is it? Well, maybe it's my data. Well, it's these other companies that actually have the data. And the companies own the data, and they make use of the data, and they're making a lot of money based on the data, right? And we've never questioned it. We regular people out in the world doing the things we're doing as we go through our day, we don't question the fact that those data belong to those companies on which they're making a huge amount of profit, right? On the amount of cost it takes, the amount of dollars, the cost it takes for them to actually store the data and manage the data versus what they get out of it by selling it and reselling it, combining it and using for a bunch of algorithms, just outrageous. So the question for us is, well, maybe we should own some of those data. Maybe we should be able to control some of those data. Maybe we should be able to actually maybe jointly control them, right? So if we work...
We being people. So just
we being individuals.
Folks, right?
Absolutely.
Not the big companies.
No. We individuals.
We
Mary and John, right? We should be the ones that it's our data. We're generating it. Where I go is where I go. So why can't I have my location data be associated with me in some way? And maybe I can do something with those data. Maybe I can actually share them, and maybe I can actually create value with them, right? Maybe I can actually work with other programmers who write algorithms that actually find interesting things about me and tell me, and I can choose to share them or not. It gives me control over my data, not unlike the way Copernicus gave us control over our universe, right? And that's the Copernican moment for me, that it was a shift from, well, that it was the heavens and the stars telling us everything that we were doing, when in fact it was really just the stars and the planets in movement, and we had a sense of where they were and how they were actually moving, and we could take a sense of control over, okay, that's how it works. Oh, okay, so now we know what we can do and what we can't do. And that becomes our province, right? And it becomes the province of individuals. And that was the moment, and that's the moment about data.
Yeah, and I think you see it happening all over the place now, right? I think we've been talking about this and doing work of this together and in the lab for quite some time, right? We have the data economy and the secret life of data and this idea. But for me, one of the pivotal things I saw just a few months ago was, I think, an op-ed in Bloomberg Business Week, where the writer was coming to grips with the fact that he had a second self. and that second self was a digital second self that lived, and it was all data. And that second self was as active and as full and was living a life much like his life. Wasn't exact, though. That was the other thing. It was like, well, that second self wasn't a lot like him. Right, and I think that the lovely thing about the work that you and Brandon and all the other folks are doing is in a way it's syncing up those selves, which is important, but then also getting those selves to then go off and do something. You're kind of enabling people to allow that second self just to go do
Absolutely.
things.
It's like a partial second self even, right? Just being off, working on your behalf, doing things for you, doing things you didn't even anticipate they were doing because they're combining with other second selves out there in the world, doing interesting stuff, making life way more interesting than we ever imagined it could possibly be.
So there's that sort of Copernican moment for people, and I think you can watch it. Like for that guy writing in Bloomberg, you could see him having that moment going, oh goodness. Have you seen other data Copernican moments, or do you, even in your imagination, have one as well? That is, there's something where something is a shift that literally doesn't change us physically. Again, that's what I loved about your example about Copernicus and data, is that nothing physically has changed. We're still who we are, working where we work, living where we live. Nothing physically has changed, but with that one mindset, our lives change, what we can do, our capabilities, how we make money, how we live and love and shop, and all that sort of stuff radically changes. Can you think of another moment like that? Have you seen other data ones, or do you even have one personally?
Oh, interesting question. I think the one that we've been thinking about the most recently is the notion that societies have been built up until now completely on physical assets. What does that mean? It means that societies have been based on things, right? We have things, whether it's natural resources or things we make or things we own or things we buy or things we give as gifts. Those are things, physical things that we give away to other people. And when I have a thing, a book, and I give a book to you, Brian, right, I have given my book away. I don't have the book, now you have the book. And there's an argument that says that the way society is organized is based on basically managing those things, right? Some of them are scarcer than others, so we're managing scarce resources or managing plentiful resources. That's what it's been. But I think we're moving into a completely new world that we don't know how to live in yet. And I think it's based on having digital assets, right? Whether you call it data or not, it doesn't matter. Second cells, multiple books, right? Digital assets of various sorts. And when you have digital assets, I'm going to argue that you can change the way we organize ourselves as societies. We're still physical beings, right? We still need to eat and that sort of thing. But more and more of our lives are being determined by or enhanced by our digital assets. And that means we can act differently. We can make money differently. We can work differently. We can live differently. All the things you said. And I think it's fundamentally different because I think it changes the relationship we have to things. I don't think they're so scarce anymore. I don't think we have to live the same way we did. I don't think we have to manage scarce resources as they're mine. You can't have them. I don't think we have to hoard. Right? I think we can actually be freer. I think we can share more. I think we can make things more available to more people more readily. People can choose the kinds of things they want to look for or look at. They don't all. Not everybody has to read the same thing. Right? I think it changes who we are as people. I think it changes who we are as societies. I think it can potentially change who we are as nation states. Right? We don't have to be organized the same way. That could easily sound like crazy talk. Right? Easily. Right? And I recognize that. And I think it's going to take us a long time to figure that out. I think there's a lot of legal structures and a whole bunch of stuff that's in place that sort of says, well, we live in this particular way, and why would we not live in that particular way? But I think it's going to change. I think it's going to have to change. I think we will get our physical needs tended to, but I think our digital capabilities are going to give us more and more opportunity to be with each other on the planet in much more interesting ways than we've been up until now.
And what I think is interesting is in all the work that we've done together now for many years is what I've always said to people is why I love basing the futurism I do and the future casting that I do and actually the design work we do at Intel is we base it on social science first and foremost, literally on the work that you and your colleagues and your researchers do. We base it on social science because human beings don't change all that much. And one of the things I think is very profound in what you've just said is that we are changing, and that digital is doing that. And that is just a preview of your upcoming book, which we'll probably have you back, and we'll probably do an IEEE column about that, about the radical flux that's coming out soon. And we'll make sure that we get information to everybody about that. But it's really interesting that we are in this moment where things are in flux in a very deep way. And I think the work that you guys have been doing is really awesome. So, Dr. Tony Salvador, thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
Thank you, Brian David Johnson. It's been a pleasure.
The September column for science fiction prototyping is a little bit different. It's a little bit different than most of our columns. This month, we're putting out a call to everyone to tell us their Copernican moment. And we're really using it as a way to fuel possible future science fiction prototypes. I'm struck by this notion of the Copernican moment because it's so visceral, it's so real, and it's so human. You know, what does it feel like when your entire world, your entire universe, or maybe your entire metaverse changes, but just with an idea? I mean, imagine what Copernicus felt when he was looking up at the night sky, had the flash of inspiration, and all of a sudden, the Earth was at the center of our solar system, and everything was reordered. This changed everything. And Copernicus knew it. Even when you look back at history, he knew the power that this would have on the world. But imagine what it would feel like to be Copernicus, looking up at the night sky, and nothing has physically changed. He was still Copernicus. He was still standing in the same places that he had stood on the previous night or the previous day. The sky that he looked up into was still the exact same sky. Physically, everything was the same. But because of this one shift, because of this Copernican moment, everything had changed. Literally, the solar system, the universe, everything had changed. And that's what we're looking for in this month's column. What is your Copernican moment? What is the thing that you see coming in the future that could utterly and fundamentally change how we see and think about the world around us? And then how could we explore that in a science fiction prototype? For myself, it's the work on the multiverse and the metaverse, that the idea that we could be living in a world of multiple universes, and that what that does to our physics and what that does to our mathematics, this is something that I think is incredibly powerful. But I know there are more, and I know there are others, and I'm really interested to find out what other people's Copernican moments could be, and then to use science fiction prototyping as a tool to explore the human impact of those breakthroughs, of those flashes of inspiration. So I'm really excited to hear what you come up with, and please contact me. You can always reach me, just like every month, at brian.david.johnson@intel.com. That's brian.david.johnson, Johnson, at intel.com. As well, you can always follow me on Twitter. I'm at Intel Futurist. I also wanted to continue to remind everybody that we are still having our youth fiction competition for the Tomorrow Project. That's the competition where we're asking young minds ages 13 to 25 to send us their visions of the future. An independent editorial committee will select 10 winners, and they will each be awarded $1,000. And then we will not only publish those winners, but we will publish as many winners as we can to get those visions, those science fiction prototypes of young minds out there. And we're looking for not only written fiction, but comic books and movies and essays as well. And we've been lucky enough to work with Arizona State University and the Center for Science and the Imagination, as well as the Society for Science and the Public, the people who publish science news and science news for kids. It's been a really interesting beginning to the competition, and we're looking forward to getting more and more entries and more visions of the future from these young minds. So if you know any people, if you know any young minds who have a vision, if you know of any science classes or any English classes, please go out there. Please become an ambassador for the future, and let's see how many stories and how many visions for the future that we can get. I want to thank you for joining me on this month's Science Fiction Prototyping Podcast, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.